Dark Souls 2 was received very favourably by critics, but there was quite a backlash among fans that persists even to this day. Some fans decried that Miyazaki took quite a big backseat on the game, but this was for a very good reason. He was busy heading what was originally known as Project Beast, what we now know as Bloodborne. Released on the 24th of March 2015 on the PS4, the game takes place in a Victorian-era city by the name of Yharnam, and your character travels here for a mysterious blood transfusion. Yharnam is known for its miracle healing blood, and yeah, there must be some wild stuff in there because a werewolf materializes out of a pool of blood and creeps over to the character before getting set on fire, and little ghouls? Kinda cute little ghouls, kinda, won't lie. Anyway, little ghouls start crawling out. With that, you take control of your character, with only one message as our motivation to go onward. Seek pale blood to transcend the hunt. A very elegant setup to get us into the game. Proceeding downstairs, the first enemy encountered in the game is spotted snacking on some unfortunate guy. A la Demon Souls, you're supposed to die to this enemy so the game can provide you with weapons and a brief explanation of the combat, but like the Vanguard, you can kill this enemy if you're quick enough, patient enough, and pro-gamer enough. Go! Killing werewolves with karate chops. Leaving the sick room opens up into central Yharnam and your first lantern. These serve as bonfires and archstones from the previous games. A checkpoint you respawn from if you die, and a way to access the Hunter's Dream, the hub area of the game. For the moment, there's a doll that's been abandoned here, and the little ghouls from the intro cutscene known as the Messengers. From these you can choose your starting weapons, the Sword Cleaver, the Hunter's Axe or the Threaded Cane. The Hunter's Axe is very hard hitting but slower to swing, the Threaded Cane being much faster in comparison, with the Sword Cleaver being a good balance between the two. I picked the Sword Cleaver. Bloodborne also introduces guns, and you can choose between the pistol or blunderbuss. I prefer the latter, but it's not like you're locked out of weapons like choosing a starter Pokemon for example. You obtain every weapon mentioned during the course of the game. Inside the Hunter's Dream you meet Gehrman, an old man who explains that while we're in Yharnam, the Hunter's Dream will be our home and be sneak killing. Back in Yharnam, we meet our first friendly NPC outside of the Hunter's Dream, Gilbert, a character you interact with through a window. He's clearly ill, but he does his best to be of help, advising you to head to the Cathedral Ward. With weapons in hand, the player is far more equipped to face the challenges Bloodborne has to offer. The enemies that took minutes to kill by traditionally throwing hands now take a few hits with the Soul Cleaver. Although combat seems similar to the Soul series, it has pretty distinct differences that give Bloodborne's combat style its own unique identity. The gun more or less replaces the shield. Shooting a character just before they land an attack lets you perform a visceral attack, essentially a parry. The backstab has changed too. Now you need to land a charged heavy attack on the enemy's back, causing them to stumble, and then you can backstab them. Bloodborne above all else encourages heavy aggression, and this is shown best with the rally mechanic. When you get hit, you have a window of a few seconds where if you manage to land attacks, you can get increments of health back, which can be crucial in the middle of a heated fight. Your main way of healing is through blood vials, though. These work similar to healing grass in Demon Souls, a consumable item that you can carry up to around 20 of. Unlike healing grass, however, there isn't different types of vials like there is grass, healing a fixed percentage of damage regardless of your vitality. I'm not going to go into every little shortcut or twists and turns in the level design, but I will say that the design of Yharnam is extremely strong, calling back to the first half of Dark Souls 1 with lots of paths that loop back to the various lanterns. In any case, when we first go up the stairs to the first lantern, a weird screech could be heard. And now, at the end of the bridge, we learn the source of the noise. The first boss of the game, the Cleric Beast, and what a fucking excellent first impression. The music is amazing, and in my opinion, he's a perfect balance of depth and challenge for a first boss. If this is your first playthrough, his rapid movements would pretty easily throw off a new player, but if you're aware of his weakness, fire and sting behind him, he can go down pretty easily, but can still manage to put up a fight. Encountering the Cleric Beast is pretty likely to give the player their first insight, which isn't an important mechanic for the moment, but I'll explain later in the video. It causes the doll in the Hunter's Dream to come to life, who serves as the level up lady of the game. Next up is going through the aqueduct, so there isn't really much of note here, but it is where you find one of the first weapons in the world, the Soul Spear, so I'll talk a little bit more about the weapons. In the Souls games, there were hundreds of weapons, but a lot of them share the same movesets depending what type of weapon they are. Swords, halberds, spears, axes, etc. Bloodborne has a lot less weapons in comparison, totaling around 23 in the main campaign. However, each and every weapon has its own unique moveset, including a trick variant, changing the weapon's appearance and moveset significantly. I really like the approach of both personally. They work for what they are in their own games. The other thing of note here is Eileen the Crow, my personal favourite character in Bloodborne. She calls herself a hunter of hunters. Like the very friendly, welcoming townspeople, she explains the hunters are not immune to the beastly scourge, but we must carry on regardless. There's also an optional little side story involving the upcoming boss. A young girl asks us to go look for her mother, who went out to see their father but forgot a music box that helps him remember them. She mentions that their mum wears a red jeweled brooch. This won't make much sense until we encounter the boss in question, Father Gascoigne. A lot of boss fights fall into two categories, giant monsters and more human/humanoid sized enemies. Cleric Beast gave you a taste of the former, and Gascoigne for the latter. And this fight is insanely good. As I mentioned before, you can use your gun to parry enemies, but the boss can do the same for you. You're both working with the exact same toolkit more or less, although if you do use your music box, you can stun the boss temporarily. However, using the box too much or getting him to a certain amount of health causes Gascoigne to turn into a werewolf-like beast, causing him to become even more aggressive and hit even harder. Also, fun fact, if anyone watched Tracy Beaker as a kid, the voice actor for Gascoigne is the character Mike in that show. I don't know why I know this, but I had to put this little bit of trivia in the video at some point, and I couldn't think of another place to do so. It's really amusing to me, so there you go. Inspecting the corpses around the boss arena, one of them has the red jewel brooch in question, implying that Gascoigne killed his wife in a blood-drunken rage. You can take this back to the young girl if you want, or choose to hold this information from her, ending this little side quest early. After killing Gascoigne, the way into the cathedral ward is opened, serving as your safe space in the actual world outside of the hunter's dream. Inside is the chapel dweller, and man, he's just happy to be here, and to see someone for that matter. He also suggests to tell anyone who needs a place to stay about this place, which is where NPCs can stay for the length of the game. Conversely, you can also suggest characters go to Yosefska's clinic, the area where you woke up in at the start. You'll want to avoid this place as much as possible, which I'll also explain later. Expect this to be a little bit of a running theme in the video. Saying things and then saying I'll explain them later. You can also go up to the Grand Cathedral, but I'm going to take a little detour for some extra goodies and to meet Alfred, who kind of serves as the Solaire equivalent of the game. He tells you a little bit more about the different factions in the world and suggests to cooperate, meaning he can be summoned for boss fights. He even shares the same voice actor as Solaire, so there's that. The parallels were probably very intentional. Exploring some more reveals Old Yharnam, which is now cordoned off and abandoned due to the amount of beasts becoming too much to control. A voice from afar warns us to turn back or suffer dire consequences. Fuck him, he's not even my real dad, I'll do what I want. The man shooting at you is known as Jura, the Old Hunter. He's attempting to protect the beasts as he knows that they're former citizens of Old Yharnam. You can actually befriend him, but it makes traversing this area extremely awkward in my opinion, or you'll just have to leave Old Yharnam altogether until about the halfway point of the game. And Jura's pretty tough, but there is a way to cheese him. Only took me like 15 tries. After making your way through more dingy, werewolf-infested streets, you find where the boss, the blood-starved beast, resides. It's one of the quicker moving bosses and has a residual poison mechanic, but like all beasts, it has an extreme weakness to fire. It's a really good fight, it feels like a natural escalation of the cleric beast battle in my opinion. Beating this boss rewards you with the Fumeru Chalice. I'll give a brief explanation, but I'll be getting into the Chalice feature of the game in its own dedicated section towards the end of the main campaign, at the end of the video. Simply put, they're optional dungeons that feature extra bosses. Some can only be encountered in their respective interactive dungeons. Now, in my actual recording, I did the Chalice dungeons pretty much as soon as I got the materials needed, but like I said, I'll discuss them all in one go a bit later on. I say a bit, quite a bit later on, really. I've done pretty much all there is to do in this area, so I'm gonna work on getting up to the Grand Cathedral. You can also explore and find the abandoned workshop and cosplay as the doll with her outfit set. Clearly the most important item here. No, clearly the most important item in the game. If I can't pretend to be my own 7-foot tall plastic mommy figure, what's the point of playing the game, I ask you. There's also some umbilical cord you can pick up. Ooh, not important. Moving on to the nearby streets outside of the cathedral ward, you get to converse with a few of the townspeople, and whilst most of them more or less tell you to fuck off, man, with the rowdy crowds and standoffish, freakish locals, FromSoft really captured the horror of living in Britain. They really did. But you do meet a nice NPC, a prostitute named I don't know how to pronounce her name, Ariana? She's looking for a safe place to stay, so I directed her to the chapel, and next to her is a not-so-nice NPC, a grumpy old man, who goes to the opposite place you direct him to. The only thing left to do now is to head up to the Grand Cathedral and challenge Vicar Amelia. In my opinion, she's the hardest boss fought so far by a country mile. She's incredibly agile for her size, and she hits like a truck. She serves as the first real roadblock of the game. She also makes for a really good example of the breakable limb mechanic in Bloodborne. Now, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure on how it works, but on bigger enemies, if you hit a particular spot, let's say for the sake of argument their leg, a lot of blood will spurt out of said limb, doing bigger damage, and if you hit a weak spot, it allows you to perform a visceral attack on the enemy for even more damage. I really like this mechanic and concept, but I feel like it could have been executed a little bit better. It's clearer on some enemies than others, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it's ever directly addressed during the game itself. I know that FromSoft like to be cryptic, but I feel like with semi-important mechanics like this, it should be clearly laid out to you, say like in a note from a messenger, for example, or an NPC. With Amelia defeated, we get a new cutscene of Loris and Willem, showing what I believe to basically be the birth of the Healing Church, with the pair now clashing in ideologies on how to use the old blood, Lawrence wanting to spread it to the masses, and Willem taking a more patient, wait-and-see approach, I guess. By meeting certain requirements, the world will shift into different phases, for lack of a better term, causing certain side quests to update and changes in the world to be made. Killing Amelia changes said phase into nighttime. This new shift in the world also continues Eileen's story. Back in Gascoigne's arena is an unknown hunter who attacks you on sight, with Eileen coming in to help you out. This hunter is Hemwick, Gascoigne's old partner who's gone mad, and I think it's implied he's Gascoigne's dad, as the girl mentions a granddad, and it's clearly stated that he's been a hunting partner for a long time, so it does make sense. But on the way back to the Grand Cathedral, I was taken by surprise by a new enemy, known as a Snatcher. Yes, I was very much put off guard and couldn't have done anything to stop this from happening, this brutal assault. Ah. Okay, I know you were all deceived by that Oscar-worthy performance. I did this in order to explore Yarhal Ghul, the unseen village. Really, this area is meant to be properly explored during the second half of the game, although if you do decide to look around, you're rewarded with the Tonitrus weapon, and meeting another friendly NPC, Adela the Nun, who will only trust you if you're wearing a church garb. Bloodborne has a couple of these interactions where it will change the dialogue depending on what you're wearing, and I really like this concept, and I wish there was more to this, seeing as there's no equipment burden mechanic like there is in Dark Souls. From the Grand Cathedral, you can take a path to the left or the right. First, we're going to take a path to the left and head into a dark woods, leading into Hemwick Charnel Lane. The enemy variant is mixed up a little bit here, mainly consisting of old women with cleavers, weird shadowy figures with sickles, and executioners, which are pretty tricky for this point in the game. Hemwick is an area I'm a big fan of. The atmosphere is especially thick here, especially the section in the barn with the darkness and sound design of the enemies. Although it isn't the area I find the creepiest, I'll get to that later, I do find it to be quite unsettling. The boss, however, is one of the easiest in the whole game, the Witches of Hemwick. You just run around the arena until you spot the two, attack them, rinse, repeat. It's not really anything interesting in my opinion, considering they don't really do anything aside from trying to stun you every now and then, leaving the shadow people I mentioned before to do most of the work. Lazy. Lazy women. Lazy witches. Despicable. On the right path outside of the Grand Cathedral is a lot less to offer than on the left side, honestly. There's a couple of enemy hunters that I found a funny way to fuck up by standing on the roof of the nearby building and then just poking at them with Ludwig's Holy Blades R2 attack. You can go down some steps and find a bunch of executioners just standing around super close to each other. You can run past them and find a room with nothing in it. Wink, wink. Okay, that's a lie. There is a door, but it's locked off at this point in the game. Now, on to progressing in the main game, heading downstairs from the Grand Cathedral and into the main square, and getting some easy kills and blood vials from the sleeping giants, you can discover the Forbidden Woods. You can meet Alfred again, who gives you some more information regarding the Vile Bloods in a place called Cainhurst. Next to him is a door which you need a password to progress for. The phrase in question being from the flashback we saw after the Vicar Amelia fight, Fear the Old Blood. Now for me, the Forbidden Woods is without question the creepiest area in the entire game, and this is down to the new enemy types you find. Snakes. I hate snakes, and the Forbidden Woods is chock full of them. You got men with snake heads, little balls of snakes, big balls of snakes, huge balls of snakes, even the boss summons snakes. The Shadows of Yharnam objectively a pretty cool boss that tasks your situational awareness and crowd control skills, but snakes. So they are the worst. They're the worst. I hate them. There are some parts of the Forbidden Woods I really like, though. On your way through, you encounter a man crouching over some seemingly recent dead bodies. He asks you for a place to stay. Now, you can suggest he goes back to the chapel or the clinic, but attacking him shows his true nature, turning into a beast who you can cheese through with some poisoned darts. But don't get too cocky because his reach is surprisingly far. Speaking of the clinic though, there is a well that you can access that leads back into the sick room, opening up a path to the back of said clinic. Now I didn't record this in my playthrough, but if you talk to Yosefka, she says that nobody is to enter the back room of the clinic as not to infect it. However, talking to her later, she heavily encourages you to bring anyone you find here. This is because the real Yosefka, along with anyone you've sent to the clinic at this point, has been experimented on and turned into celestial beings. There is something of importance, though, a summon to Cainhurst, the place Alfred spoke of before. If you try to walk to the top floor, however, the imposter threatens our life if we go any further. You can proceed and kill her if you wish, but as she's important for the later half of the game, we'll leave her alone for now. Beating up the Shadows of Yharnam opens up the path to Byrgenwerth. There's not that much here other than some fucked up looking monsters, namely the mosquito men and the giant centipede things. What's important is the building. There's another NPC hunter, and I swear to God, this and a later one that comes to mind, but some of the unique hunters can be harder than some of the bosses in this game, and it's pretty maddening. At the wacky Byrgenwerth house, you find Willem in his rocking chair, pointing at the moon, so naturally the only logical conclusion is to jump off the balcony and into the lake. Obviously. It's like putting two and two together. It transports you to some weird water dimension where Rom the vacuous spider waits, completely passive until you engage it. Now we've seen our fair share of spooky fellas so far, but Rom's probably the most otherworldly thing seen so far, and due to in-game lore and factors outside of the actual game, I feel kind of bad for Rom. Vacuous basically meaning mindlessness or lack of intelligence. In fact, I might be wrong, but I remember reading somewhere in I think it was the French art book, he's just straight up called stupid. Like, what the fuck did Rom do? Justice for Rom, like, Rom didn't do anything, they're just vibing. And also, this is not important to the video at all, but I just thought it was really funny. So Rom will teleport away during different increments of the fight, depending on how damaged it is, but you can stop it from doing so if you hit it hard enough and stagger it. And the first time I played this game, I don't remember what I did, but I was really, either my weapon was really buff or I was really buff at that point in the fight. And I think Rom just bugged out because none of the enemies came, he just spun in a circle and kept getting hit out of his teleport move, and I killed him without doing anything. And it was really weird, and I've never had a chance to talk about it, and I've never seen it done anywhere, but I swear to God it happened. No one believes me, but I swear to God it happened. So you beat Rom, with a ghostly woman appearing out of nowhere, and the hunter wakes up in the building on the right path of the Grand Cathedral with a new message and goal. Ritual secret broken. Seek the nightmare newborn. As you'll notice, the once locked door is wide open, along with a Lovecraftian monster hanging off the ceiling. Rom acted essentially as a barrier. With their death, that barrier is now broken, allowing all sorts of horrors to be accessible to the player. This plays into the insight mechanic that I've neglected to mention up until now. So what this is basically is a tally that increases whenever you see something inhuman. The more insight you have, the more resistant to things such as frenzy damage and resistant to beasthood you are. But you can also spend insight in the Hunter's Dream for other things such as extra consumables and extra costumes. You also need to use insight to summon NPCs as spirits or other players, akin to using a humanity to reverse hollowing and summon phantoms in Dark Souls. In concept, I think this mechanic had a ton of potential, but I don't think it was used as thoroughly as it could have been. I love that it's tied to what's going on in the world in the final game, but I just feel like that concept of the more inhuman things you see, it being tied to a stat you can look at and things becoming more varied as the game goes on. I feel like this concept could have been pushed so much further. Like I was saying, imagine the more insight you gain, the more eldritch creatures you see just like vibing, or more weird variations on enemies and interactions in the world happens. This is something that I'm just like spitballing here off the top of my head, and realistically my ideas probably couldn't be implemented to its fullest due to technical limitations, but I reckon it's something to think about. Maybe for a Bloodborne 2, huh? Please? The now open door now reveals the rest of the unseen village, and damn, this area is pretty tough in my opinion. The creatures known as amygdalas hang all over the walls, and a few of them are pretty aggressive. Their laser beams combined with respawning enemies make getting through some parts of Yharnam a mad dash to the next brief moment of safety. It really helps hit home that things are stepping up in terms of challenge, and you're getting towards the back end of the game at this point. Going back to where we could explore in the first half of the game, I've never actually heard this word spoken. Hypoliogen jail? I've never heard it spoken. I've only seen it written word, so I don't know how you pronounce it. There's a boss fight that I completely forgot about up until now, Dark Beast Paul. And for an optional boss, they go so hard on his theme. Like, I often forget that this is his theme. Bloodborne has plenty of good tracks, right? But this one in particular always stood out to me. Another thing I really like about him is his just general design. For such a massive entity, they managed to make him seem really lanky. Like, all the way his limbs move, like, individually, makes me think of a Slinky for some reason. I don't know, but I really enjoy it. I really like it. But with the next phase in the world taking place, more side quests have opened up, but a lot of NPCs in the chapel have started to act strangely. Ariana has doubled over in pain, the old woman thinks you're her son, and the nun just laughs. Also side note, she's a fucking creep. If you talk to the prostitute in the first half of the game, you'll notice if she's there, she's always looking over at you when you're talking to her. She doesn't do it with any other NPC, it's only with her. She's a fucking creep. However, you might have noticed that the Grand Cathedral lamp is now inaccessible. That's due to the advancement of Eileen's story. You'll find her lying on the steps into the building, explaining that a hunter caught her off guard, and I kind of alluded earlier that a couple NPC hunters are weirdly strong. I unironically think this one guy is one of the hardest fights in the whole game. He can kill you in like 2 hits, he's insanely fast with his dodge effect, and is really hard to stagger, meaning you can get about 2 or 3 hits in before he viscerals you, if you're lucky. A stray bullet from his gun takes off half my health bar alone. Your only, and I mean only, hope of beating this guy is baiting him into adding the blood effect to his weapon so he's damaged over time, and fish for dear life for visceral attacks. I have about 2.5 hours of footage just fighting this one guy. It was hellish. Conversely, from one of the hardest opponents in the game to one of the easiest, the boss in the Unseen Village is the one reborn, which I believe is the Mensis scholar's attempt to create a great one. In other words, an eldritch creature made from the citizens of Yharnam, which didn't go well. If the looks of Rom and amygdala are anything to go by, whoa honey, you're not looking so good. You tried using some moisturizer? Tried using a nice shampoo? This fight serves as a rehash on the Tower Knight fight from Demon Souls functionally, with enemies on high being the real threat, so getting rid of them before focusing on the boss is the way to go here. But the actual boss itself isn't really anything noteworthy. I think the main problem is two things. One, it really doesn't do a lot of damage for this point in the game, and a lot of attacks it has you can just walk around. It's giant and its vomit move only covers one side, so you can just move to the other side. Like, it's not rocket science, just walk away from it. Now after this, there's only one more required area to beat the game, so instead I'm going to head off the beaten path and into the lecture hall, where the scholars of Mensis used to reside. The only things of importance here are some materials where you can use to make some Chalice dungeons later in the game, some students, there's no easy way to say it, made of cum. Young, dumb, and made of cum. And Patches, who's a spider, and I definitely did some things out of order here. Normally the amygdala at the door into the Unseen Village grabs you and throws you into the Nightmare Frontier with some narration from Patches. Then you're supposed to confront him here, but in the context of my playthrough he's like, I am so sorry for what I did, but you had to, you know how it is. And my character's just stood there like, bro, what the fuck's going on? We've literally never spoken. What are you talking about? So anyway, the Nightmare Frontier. Visually, it's really different from the rest of Bloodborne, which makes itself stand out from that alone. But it's more or less the government-mandated FromSoft Poison Swamp area, but that doesn't really bother me at all. In fact, I think it's pretty well designed. It gives antidotes pretty handily from bodies, and there's lots of land structures you can climb onto in order to offset the rising poison meter. My main complaint is the inclusion of the big Yeti enemies, specifically their rock-throwing attack, which it can pretty much one-shot a decently beefy health bar, and that can get pretty annoying. But as a trade-off, they can't do much of anything up close. That and the area is pretty small, meaning there isn't really a ton of backtracking to do if you do die. This will also likely be the first time you encounter the Winter Lantern enemy, who are absolutely terrifying in every sense of the word. Whenever they walk around, they hum this really creepy sounding song. Whenever you get near them, they passively build frenzy, which if filled can nearly one-shot you. That combined with their love for grab attacks means if they do manage to get you, there's an extremely high chance you're done right there and then. They also look like they use the model of the doll, aside from the head obviously, making for a very unsettling vibe that I can only really describe as an I guess like Uncanny Valley-esque sort of effect. Like from very far away they do look kinda close to the doll, but just not quite. Luckily you can open up a shortcut that skips the route they stay in entirely to get to the boss. The amygdala, yes, one of the things you've seen hanging around on the buildings in Yharnam. I always presume that this is their primary world, and they just kind of phase into Yharnam whenever they feel like. Their arms and head are extremely weak, but standing right by them is an easy way to get squished. Conversely, staying at their backs and underbody isn't really viable, as attacking these body parts do next to no damage. It's a really cool risk-reward type of fight, and I think it's really well done here. Next in this, optional exploration extravaganza is the Upper Cathedral Ward, which, as I'm sure you can work out from the name, is the higher area of the ward. It's clear more experiments similar to that of the Mensa scholars have taken place here, shown by the slug babies all over the floor, but the bees still play an integral role at this late stage of the game, shown best by this excellent scare in an upcoming building. Like, I've played this game before, I knew this was coming, and it still gets me. It's a brilliantly executed little sequence. That and I'm kind of very easy to scare. Once you've killed the werewolves and the brain suckers hidden away, you get the make contact gesture, which seems like a silly little emote at first, but I'll explain its importance once it becomes apparent in the actual game. Upon opening up more of the ward, you're greeted with a boss fight with the Celestial Emissary. I'm not a huge fan of this boss. It's kind of like a horde battle, but a bunch of celestial bobbleheads stammer towards you, and you have to wipe them out until you discover which enemy the boss health bar corresponds to. Once its health gets to about half, it transforms into the full boss, and I guess the reason why I'm not as big of a fan of this is opposed to Rom per se, the proper boss isn't always present, resulting in it being way too easy to just attack the enemy before it turns into its true form, and as a result it kind of feels like it's ruining the fight. Don't get me wrong, it's not the worst boss in the game or anything, but I just feel like the Rom fight did the same concept but better. Upon first glance, it does seem like that there's all there is to this section, but there's more. Going down the elevator reveals another great one, Ebriatus, daughter of the cosmos. Like Rom, she won't attack you until you hit her first, and if I recall correctly, she's crying due to another great one being able to ascend beyond this plane of existence, resulting in her being left behind. Whether it was actually Rom themselves or another great one, I don't remember, to be honest. I remember this boss being really easy on my first playthrough, but I must have been extremely lucky because she handed my ass to me this time around. She's got a great variety of close and long range attacks which keeps the fight interesting, but there's something about this boss I've always had a huge soft spot for. Its design is really cool, and a story of seemingly being abandoned by a fellow Great Ones, thus siding with the Healing Church as they share the same goal. I don't know, I've always found it really interesting. The altar she stood next to is also potentially important to her story, but I'll get to that once we find a use for it ourselves. Alright, so our final detail before the Nightmare of Mensis and my favourite area in the base game. Actually, my favourite area in the whole game. So way earlier, I got the Cainhurst summons in Yosefsky's clinic, meaning that this place can now be accessed. Back in Hemwick Charnel Lane, in the open space just before the Witches of Hemwick arena, a horse-drawn carriage appears out of nowhere. Interact with it and you'll be taken away to a wintry landscape. Turn around and the bridge you drove through is now destroyed, the horses on the floor long dead. An amazingly spooky setup, and exploring Cainhurst Castle totally delivers. All the enemies are unique to this area, and as I'm sure you can guess by the music I chose, the environment and especially the intro cutscene feel very Castlevania, and I just adore every second I'm in Cainhurst. Ghost women who were presumably Cainhurst citizens brutally slaughtered by the Vile Blood Hunters. F. Gargoyles and bloated locust people, oh my. I mentioned before that exploring here is particularly fun, and I think it's to do with crossing so many rooftops and window landings. Getting around feels very similar to Anno Londo and from Dark Souls 1 in that way. And the final rooftop awaits Martyr Ligarius, the same one that leads the faction Alfred follows so fanatically, using himself as a final barrier to the ruler of Cainhurst. Now this boss is the complete inverse of Abriatus, where I could remember having an insanely tough time against him on my first playthrough, and although the fight is still fun, I think the reason I had so much trouble is I either didn't know or wasn't confident enough to parry him, which in the second half of the fight he's pretty vulnerable to. So you'll kill him and take his crown, opening up the path to Annalise, Queen of the Vile Bloods. You can choose to join her, or if you pick the unopened Cainhurst summons near her, you can give it to Alfred and he'll mosey on over and turn her into the Queen of Jelly. Which, if you're looking to get all the weapons for the Platinum Trophy like I was for this recording, you'll need to do. No smoke, Annalise, it's just business. If you venture back to where you first met Alfred, you'll find his corpse so he can be a true martyr like his idol. However, seeing as Annalise is near enough immortal, you can take some of her flesh and bring it to the altar where Ebriatus was, with the implication that Ebriatus, or this altar of despair, can reverse the flow of time. Perhaps she was trying to bring back one of her kind. Who knows? Point being, you can bring Annalise back to life as if nothing happened. So, Alfred went to all that effort and killed himself for nothing. Sorry, bud. We're back on track with the main story at the Nightmare of Mensis. Now, the first thing you'll probably notice is the bright orange light that causes frenzy damage. Mensis gets a lot better as it goes on, but this starting area did not make for a good first impression at all for me. Now, I know there's plenty of rocks to cover yourself to stop the frenzy buildup, but it's still massively annoying to me, in a way the Nightmare Frontier's Poison Swamp somehow never managed to be. The throwing rock yetis making a comeback doesn't help things either, just the combination of both of those things just kind of does my tits in, I won't lie. The next room onwards is much better, unless you're an arachnophobe, in which case this is probably hell on earth for you. It's just all spiders, and one massive spider, but I'd gladly take this over the Frenzy Light any day personally. Moving forward, we get to who's largely responsible for keeping the Nightmare of Mensis active as far as I know. Mikolash, the host of the Nightmare. Now this boss is a bit controversial, with a lot of players finding this boss pretty tedious, and I can understand that. He basically runs around aimlessly until you can corner him and slash at him for a little while, rinse and repeat till he dies, but I personally find this approach to be really unique, and I really like just having to listen to him ramble on and on about things we, and to be honest, himself, can probably barely even understand and comprehend until he's just put down. With this, I believe that we've eliminated basically the last remains of Mikolash's existence, as his corpse is sat in the chair in the Unseen Village, specifically the place where we can access the nightmare from, so I imagine his conscience just comes back into a, human plane of existence, and he just realizes, oh fuck, I'm dead. That's gotta suck, honestly. But, his fault. With his death, this causes another shift in the world and allows the player to collect a few items that are essential in order to get the true ending of the game. Head back to the Cathedral Ward and you'll notice Ariana is missing, with a trail of blood leading back to the entrance. She's given birth, seemingly to an infant Great One. Attacking either kills both of them, but you'll need to in order to collect an umbilical cord. But damn, I feel so bad for Ariana, like she didn't ask for any of this. Not to mention that creepy nun, if you take too much of Ariana's blood for her liking and not hers, she'll kill Ariana before she's impregnated with a Great One, and this causes you to miss out on a chance for an umbilical cord, and then she'll just try to kill you. I thought she'd try to kill you regardless after Mikolash dies, but she never tried to in my playthrough. She just sits and giggles like a creep. Continuing on our umbilical cord hunt, I never thought I'd be saying that for a video. Heading back to Yosefka's clinic, instead of threatening to kill you, she's lying on a bed. The implication being, like Ariana, she's also impregnated with a Great One, and well, we do need that umbilical cord. I'm not even a little bit sorry, she was really rude before. So the last thing to do before finishing the Nightmare of Mensis is to find the source of the frenzy causing light. Of course not before getting through the largest amounts of window landings, all stacked in one place in the entire game. If you persist, you'll find a lever. Pull on it and a giant brain will fall out of a cage and into the darkness below. Now, if you go back down to the section just before Mikolash's arena, you'll notice a cage elevated that wasn't there before. Climb in it, it'll take you to a space of pure blackness where the big brain lies silently. Using the make contact gesture in front of it and wait for the character's arms to switch, and you'll be rewarded with the moon rune, which in my own personal headcanon, I always took to be that the being itself is not malicious, and the frenzy buildup is just like a product of it existing. Or Mikolash and his scholars had captured and harnessed its power against its will. But you get a living string, which is required for making a Chalice dungeon, and it's completely passive when attacked, so sorry brain, you gotta go. The last thing to do is to ascend to the top of the Nightmare of Mensis. You'll meet back up with Queen Yharnam, who's staring longingly at the top of a tower. Make your way up and you'll find a lone pram with the sound of a crying baby, which you'll have heard periodically at some points in the game, with this clearly being the source. Before we can get close, a shadowy cloaked figure, Mergo's wetness, stands in our way. Mergo being the name of the invisible crying baby and the son of the queen. Now, I've always believed this, but the reason why we see Mergo as just a cloak is either it's a manifestation of Mergo protecting itself and it's not a proper Great One, or it's just so much of a different entity we just can't comprehend what it looks like, even with max insight. This is just a really solid fight all around. Bloodborne uses its sound design for a spooky ambience and tense atmosphere throughout the whole game, but this really intense fight juxtaposed to this weird, slightly off-putting track, it It just hits different, man. I'm not sure if there's any significance that the song is the same that plays from the music box you get from Gascoigne's daughter, but I figured I should mention it here anyway. With the wet nurse defeated, it seems that Mergo's no longer chained to the nightmare and is able to move on to its proper realm, presumably with his mother peacefully. As if we go to see Yharnam after the fight, she will stop crying and bow to us before vanishing, implying her and Mergo are at peace now. Isn't that nice? Back at the Hunter's Dream, the house where you upgrade your weapons and runes will now be on fire, but it's still completely fine to use. It's just an indication that we're at the end of the game now. The doll will make us aware of this too, informing the Hunter that Gehrman is waiting in the gardens. You can end the game here if you wish, but I'm going to circle back to discuss the Chalice dungeons first. So, Chalice dungeons. You get different chalices in the main game and they serve as some extra dungeons. There's two different types, root chalices and non-root chalices. Root chalices are completely randomized, the ones that aren't are made by FromSoft themselves. And how many times am I going to have to say, how many times have I said chalice dungeon in that sentence actually, and how many more times am I going to have to say chalice? I think Yandere Dev will have a fucking aneurysm, it's like a spider sense to him whenever anyone mentions the word chalice. You go to the empty graves to the left from where you first enter the Hunter's Dream, and as long as you have the necessary materials, you can access said dungeon. Now, I had mixed feelings on the Chalice dungeons initially. When I played Bloodborne for the first time, I think I did the first one and then just never touched them again, thinking that they were too overly complicated, although to be fair, I didn't really try to engage with the system at all. That and the Chalice dungeons are 100% optional, but if you're going for the Platinum Trophy like I was for this video, you'll need to complete a good amount of them. The dungeons are designed fairly similarly, usually consisting of 3 floors with a couple of different rooms that take you off the beaten path for extra goodies, and this design made me a little apprehensive at first. How could layers of rooms after rooms with nothing but enemies be interesting, I thought, but I very gladly spent tens of hours in these, and I think they gave me actual brain rot. I think the combination of, well, first obviously the very fun combat, the unique enemies and the environments you can only find here, and the bosses exclusive to the dungeons, worked very well to hold my interest. It was really fascinating to discover this whole new facet to a game I remembered fairly well. That is, with the exception of the cursed and defiled chalice. This is absolutely up with the most agonizing thing I've played in a FromSoft game. Hell, in a video game for that matter. Why? Well, that's because of the exclusive gimmick. Your health and damage are halved. Now, to be fair, the same goes for the enemies, with the exception of elemental damage. So of course, a lot of enemies and all of the bosses have a lot of elemental based attacks, meaning more often than not, you're gonna get one shot. Yet trying to get into a rhythm of a fight and work out a boss's patterns and getting blown away by a single mistake is not fun. So after taking down the bosses in the dungeons, some exclusive like I said before, and some being more powerful versions of bosses in the main game such as Rom and Amygdala for example, it's all in service of getting the Great Thumaru Eel Chalice. And the final boss of the Chalice dungeon, Yharnam the Fumarian Queen, is by far the best Chalice dungeon boss in my opinion. She makes for a really fun fight, and there's not really another boss fight like her in the game, mainly focusing on long ranged attacks. I do have some questions about the fight though. Firstly, why are we fighting her in the first place? I saved her baby, didn't I? I thought we were cool. Also, why is she pregnant here and not pregnant in the story? I genuinely want an answer to these questions. I've looked online whilst making this video and I can't find a real reason why. Oh well, she's got to be beaten for that trophy. I guess FromSoft really want you to beat the shit out of a pregnant woman. Thank you, Miyazaki. Very cool. Just Miyazaki or someone in the office was like, no, so you don't understand. Kicking the shit out of this pregnant woman is essential to Bloodborne's lore. Early in the game, if you've picked up the Old Hunters DLC, the messenger will give you the eye of a blood-drunk hunter. As long as you've picked this up, the amygdala chilling outside of the side exit of the Odin Chapel will grab you, taking the play into the Hunter's Nightmare, a separate realm where all hunters who lose themselves in the hunt end up. And for the moment, the environment will feel very similar, with a few changes to the layout being a variation of the Cathedral Ward area, with much tougher enemies roaming the streets. After fighting through wave after wave of corrupted hunters, you finally come across a friendly face. Simon. He initially advises you to turn back, explaining the nightmares are mainly for those who have completely lost their sanity. But upon explaining you find the nightmare fascinating, he alludes to a secret held deep within we have yet to discover. Heading into a blood-soaked cavern, we get a very eerie intro cutscene to set up the first boss of the DLC, Ludwig the Accursed, the very same Ludwig that the Holy Blade weapon is named after, and oh boy, is this a testament to the quality of this DLC or what? Ludwig is a challenging but incredible fight. The first half is very in keeping with Ludwig's appearance, completely deranged, intense, and almost non-stop charges and aggression. He can also go from charges to huge leaping attacks in the space of a few seconds, and it really keeps you on your toes. Also, tiny side note I didn't know, the tiny body that talks in the intro cutscene is still alive and can get blown the fuck out by Ludwig. It happened during my recording and I found it really funny. Once you've got his health bar to about half, Ludwig's demeanour changes however.
You were at my side all along. My true mentor, my guiding moonlight.
Of course we can't have a FromSoft game without the Moonlight Sword. Ludwig's finally come to his senses and his fighting style is far more composed compared to before, and the music, it was pretty good already, but the dynamic change once he changes to the Holy Blade is breathtaking. Once Ludwig's beaten, you can talk to him as a head. His dialogue changes depending on if you're wearing a costume from the church or not, telling him what he wants to hear and he'll pass away peacefully and give you the Moonlight Sword. Tell him his hunters aren't the honourable Spartans he hoped they would be or wear any garb not from the church, and he'll devolve into horse noises until you kill him. Overall, I feel pretty bad for Ludwig as a character. He seems to have pretty good intentions, even teaching normal civilians how to protect themselves, but he ultimately ends up losing himself to the hunt. Past the corpse pile, there's an odd man behind a cell asking if you've heard a bell toll. We haven't, and he seems unimportant, but this will be elaborated on later. Up ahead is an elevator up to the next area, the research hall. But if you get off the lift before it can take you up, another elevator will appear in its place. This will get you Lawrence's skull and an additional weapon. This is the research hall, part of the unsightly secrets that the Healing Church are looking to cover up. Grotesque experiments took place here on innocent people. Some are surprisingly friendly given the circumstances. Others, yeah, not so much. At some point Simon appears by the lantern, who instructs us to climb the astral clock tower and kill an individual known as Lady Maria. Some of the patients do mention a Maria. Along the way you can meet another friendly patient named Adeline, who asks us to fetch her some brain fluid, which we can get for attacking talking brain blobs. They don't seem to die though, which is good since they still move around and they just stop talking to you, which, yeah, fair enough, I can't really blame them for that. Also, one thing I didn't know up until recording, you can actually get into the Lumen Flower Garden here, where the boss fight the Celestial Emissary takes place in the main game, meaning the research hall has to be the same building every artist resides, which is a cool little detail. Once you've opened the large door at the end of the research hall, you're immediately put into a boss fight, not with the alluded to Maria, but the Living Failures, the most relatable boss in all of Bloodborne's library. They're alright. I find their designs pretty fun, but there's not really much to them. They're kinda similar to the Celestial Emissary speaking of, and I'm pretty sure that's intentional to convey their failed attempts to make great ones. But moveset wise, there isn't much to these fellas. Beating them unlocks a large door, leading you into an empty room with the body of a lone woman slumped over in a chair. This is Maria. Her boss fight is incredible. It's fast-paced, kinetic, and decently challenging, with her buffing herself once her damage has been lowered to a certain amount, once to create a bloody effect with more reach, and again to further add an explosive fiery effect. Maria shares a very close resemblance to the doll, and that's because she was Gehrman's former student, making his comment about using anything in the Hunter's dream, even the doll, extra weird. But what was Maria fighting to keep us away so desperately from? Past the clock tower is the answer, the fishing hamlet, the backstory of which pretty much creating the Hunter's nightmare. So, from what I understand, the Healing Church dispatched some hunters to investigate a particular village, the inhabitants of who have been mutated through their worship of what the hunters found, a great one named Kos, or as some say, Cosm. The villagers were brutally massacred, their skulls being cut open to find eyes on the inside on Willem's request. Now, it's only directly stated that Byrgenwerth students were responsible for this, but with Maria being confirmed to be there as well, I can't imagine she's the only hunter who was asked to take part. So I imagine, given the importance of finding a living Great One, many hunters were dispatched as well. You can even find Maria's weapon she uses in a well, throwing it away due to being ridden with guilt over the atrocities she's committed. This area is fantastic, hugely different than anything else in the game, and every single enemy is completely unique. My only complaint is the giant fishmen. You know why. I talked about the inside of the well. Fuck, that part you better have a Shaman Bone Blade ready to go, because if you don't, you have to deal with two at once, because you will die. In this hamlet, we hear the bell that the man in the jail cell spoke of before, being invaded by Brador, the beast-hide assassin. He basically serves to cover up the secrets in the Hunter's nightmare, and to this end, he kills Simon for getting too close. He'll invade you at specific points in the fishing hamlet, and the player finishing him off directly once they obtain his cell key. On a beach surrounded by many worshippers, you find the washed-up body of Kos. Its child, the orphan of Kos, not really a nice way of putting this, slides out of its birth hole into view, quietly sobbing up at the moon. Get near it and he starts going mental. This is one of, if not the hardest fight in the game. Maybe even one of the hardest fights in FromSoft's library. The Orphan of Kos is absolutely relentless. You are lucky to get even a few seconds rest during this fight, and it makes sense. This is the fury of Kos and its baby being taken out on the player for the mistreatment of it and its child and the people of the fishing hamlet. Only with the defeat of Kos and the slaying of the Nightmare can it finally rest peacefully and dispel the curse it created so long ago.
Ah, sweet child of Kos, returned to redemption. A bottomless curse, a bottomless sea, accepting of all that there is and can be.
This ends the main content of the Old Hunters DLC, but there is one more optional boss. If you go up to the Grand Cathedral after obtaining Lawrence's skull, you can fight the big man himself. The very same we saw talking to Willem in the cutscene, now twisted into a giant beast, and it's pretty disappointing that a pretty important character in the lore is basically a cleric beast clone with a fire effect on top. I'm not really a fan of this fight. A lot of his attacks feel very flaily, and once you lower his health enough, his legs will break and you'll just spew random piles of lava near himself, making getting near him to land attacks pretty awkward. Yeah, this one was a miss for me. Another big detour admittedly, but we're at the end of the game. Like the Souls games before them, Bloodborne has multiple endings. Gehrman will offer to make you forget the dream and move on. You can refuse this offer, like I'm doing, and if you refuse him, make sure you eat 3 umbilical cords before the end of the game. And can I just quickly say, thank God you get 4, so at least you can make a mistake and not get locked out of an entire ending. Big fan. Gehrman will act as the final boss, and ultimately his heart is in the right place. He wants you to move on, and despite the fact he desperately wants to leave the dream, he feels that this is his burden to bear, leaving no choice but to fight, and the music reflects this fantastically well. Once Gurman is beaten, the entity shackling Gurman to the dream reveals itself, the Moon Presence. And this is why we needed to hunt down those umbilical cords. Without doing so, you basically take Gurman's place, but due to the power of those umbilical cords, it's unable to absorb you, making this the game's real final boss, and it's kind of disappointing, to be honest. Don't get me wrong, it's not even close to being one of the worst bosses in the game. It really isn't even that bad, but he feels a lot weaker than a lot of the bosses just in the main game. The only thing I'm really a big fan of is its design. With the death of the Moon Presence, we've transcended, become an infant Great One being watched over by the doll, closing out the true ending of Bloodborne. What a way to go out. Overall, Bloodborne is fantastic, getting just the right amount of familiarity to FromSoft's previous games, but doing a ton to stand out and give it its own unique identity. It never feels like Dark Souls, not out in Britain edition. Whilst I do think the lore can be a bit too cryptic for its own good, even for From Software standards, I find what I'm able to glimpse from it is indeed intriguing. Bloodborne is another fantastic title in the company's lineup. And that is the end of the video. This took a long time to make, mainly because the Chalice dungeons took up quite a lot of my recording time. But it was a lot of fun. And yeah, Bloodborne is a fantastic game. I'm going to be doing a little bit more in terms of Bloodborne content. I'll be doing a boss rankings with my friends soon at some point. And I might, I don't know yet, I'm probably going to, but I haven't actually started working on it yet, make a Bloodborne iceberg video similar to the Demon Souls one. I don't know whether I'll use a already existing one and give credit, or make one of my own from facts around the internet, or maybe a little bit of both, who knows. But I'm also working on a Pokemon video on Gen 2. That's probably going to be my next big video. So I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, anyway, if you enjoyed the... Oh, and I wanted to say as well, because I didn't get a chance to say it in my last video, because it would kind of ruin the joke, I guess. But I want to give a big thank you to over getting 100 subscribers, 119 now at the time of recording. That's crazy. I know it's not a lot in YouTube, in the terms of YouTube, but I'm pretty proud of it, and I'm especially proud of how well the Demon Souls iceberg did. It's got over 6,000 views, which is crazy. So yeah, thank you all for the support. As always, please all the generic YouTuber things like comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.